Hi, thanks for tuning in today. Today I want to do a little bit of a discussion of the varieties of positions that are held by people who hold the Byzantine text type in high esteem. So, as you may know, I've been doing kind of a series of videos discussing the Byzantine text type. And part of this is because I'm just really interested in the subject and trying to figure out where I myself will land on the subject. So as I'm going along, as I'm researching and studying the subject, thinking about the subject, I like to share with people things that I'm learning. So this whole channel is really dedicated to biblical studies and things like that. If you're interested in things like that, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and I'm going to be putting out more videos, Lord willing, along similar lines as this and covering other topics as well. So I'm Stephen Hackett, and I hope this channel will be of service to you. Okay, so I had recorded most of this video. I've already recorded most of this video as you're watching this part of the video. As I went along and I was discussing some of these things, I'm sort of just doing it off the cuff, to be quite honest. I did want to mention that the spirit that I want to deliver all of this in is in a spirit of charity. And at least as far as I'm concerned, people who don't hold to a Byzantine text position or the TR, they're my brothers in Christ. And I'm not even entirely sure where I'm landing on the subject yet. I'm just exploring and learning and growing. So, as I said, this is not designed to attack anybody's position. I just want to explain the different positions that are out there because there's a lot of confusion. Now, if I explain one of your positions, say I explain a position that you hold in this video, and I do not do it accurately, I would encourage you to go down into the comment section and let me know how I've misrepresented your position, because that's 100% not my intention. I want to present everybody's position charitably and accurately. And so if I've misrepresented you, please drop it down in the comment section below. I would encourage everyone who's watching this video to go ahead and hop into the comment section, look at what maybe other people have commented, and offer your own insights and suggestions. Like I said, I've done most of this video on the cuff, so if there's any inaccuracies or problems in the video, let me know down in the comment section below. And those of you who are watching, use that comment section as an archive. So we're just friends here, discussing the Bible, discussing text types, just Bible nerds who like to get into the scriptures. We're not here to attack or be malicious or any of that. So feel free, drop down your comments down in the comment section and we'll talk about it. And you can maybe improve on this video too. So just wanted to get you that quick note before we get too far down into the weeds here, and we'll go from there. So there was a video that was put out I don't know if it's years ago or not, that was very similar to the kind of video that I'm going to be making today. And a few months ago, maybe a couple months ago, I don't know when it was exactly, I kind of determined that I was going to do a video like this, and I went to find that video, and it had been taken down. It was done by Pastor Robert Truelove. I don't know Pastor Truelove, but at the time the video had been taken down, so I thought it'd be good to have something up so people who are interested in the subject of Byzantine text type or traditional text could kind of use that to kind of deepen their study and research as to the different positions that are there. Since that time, he has put the video back up. I have not rewatched it. It's been probably over a year since I've watched it. And I deliberately did not rewatch it because I didn't want to lift phrases and things from his video. So I don't know if he'll ever watch this video or not. But Pastor Truelove, if you do watch this video, I hope you don't think I've plagiarized you too much. It's not intentional. But I did want to discuss, for the purposes of this series of videos that I'm doing, the different varieties of positions that are held, because I do notice that when people who do not hold this position, when they talk about it, oftentimes they make statements which aren't necessarily true, depending on which text position you take. So it's really easy, and it's not a big problem, because people do this with the critical text too. They sort of lump everything together, and they don't understand the careful distinctions that some people make. And in the amongst people who support a Byzantine text type, there are a variety of positions that are held, and I want to go through some of those. And so to kind of anchor this discussion, I will show you some of the printed editions. So to my mind, there's about 4 printed editions that are available, which sort of represent the different positions that are held. Now, there are people who also take a Byzantine approach to textual criticism, a Byzantine priority approach, who would not necessarily support any printed Greek New Testament, and we'll get into some of that. So let me show you the different Greek New Testaments that sort of represent these different positions. So got one that's pretty handy right here. This is the TR, the Textus Receptus. This is the one that everybody seems to get. It's the easy one to get. It's from the Trinitarian Bible Society, and it represents the Textus Receptus, which underlies the King James Version Bible. Then there is the Hodges and Farstad text, which is the majority text, and we're going to go into explaining some of the differences in these approaches. Then also you have the Robinson-Pierpont text, and we'll talk about that. And there is this one. It's Byzantine text according to Family 35, which has been done by Wilbur Pickering. So these texts, and let me grab one more. Here's a Textus Receptus, which is this is a Stephanus Textus Receptus. So let's go through and talk about these different texts. So let's start with this Textus Receptus. Now, I did a whole video on FHA Scrivener and why this text was put together. If you want to look at that, I'll try to leave a link in the description. But this is the Textus Receptus that everybody can get their hands on real easy. It's only about $8. And even if you don't support a Byzantine text type, even if you don't support the TR as your primary reader, I think this is a great thing to get anyways. It's just affordable. It's a well done Greek New Testament. I'm not here to review this. I've done a review of it. But the people who hold primarily to this, there's a couple different groups that might be lean towards this particular text. And that would be people who would hold to either a TR priority position or like a confessional text position. A TR priority position would be, let's start with the Textus Receptus. Now, there are more than one Textus, maybe would you say Textus Recepti? People who support the Textus Receptus might not appreciate that sort of terminology, but I mean, there's several different editions of the Textus Receptus, but the differences between the different editions of the Textus Receptus are relatively minor. So a person who holds to a TR priority position would not necessarily want to die on every single hill, so to speak, of the Textus Receptus. In other words, there's readings in the TR which aren't well supported by extant manuscripts. For the most part, the majority text and the TR are basically the same thing. I think I read one statistic that said that 98% of the time your TR and your Byzantine text are going to read essentially the same thing. But there are some places in the Textus Receptus, whether you go with a Stephanus edition like this one, or whether you go with Scrivener's edition, there are some places that they are not well supported by extant Greek witnesses. Now, advocates of these might say that, in centuries past, maybe some of the manuscripts have been destroyed or lost. Be that as it may, there are some readings. You can think of 1 John 5:7, and a few others. James White, Dr. James White and Dr. Jeff Riddle had discussion on one in Ephesians where the extant Greek manuscript witnesses do not well support a few of these readings. But a TR, somebody who takes a TR priority position might start with something like the Stephanus edition and say, let's start there. Let's start the discussion rolling there. I'm not going to necessarily die on every hill. There may be places where there might be errors in the TR, but I'm willing to, I want to start the discussion. Let's make this our base text and then start the discussion from there. Whereas some people like Dr. Jeff Riddle, who take a confessional text position, would say this is a perfect text. They would argue that this has been the one that was divinely preserved and protected through God. They don't take necessarily, as best I understand it, although they're willing to engage with evidence and talk about the evidence, they take a theological position to say that this Scrivener edition has been the one that God has divinely preserved. So they would take scriptures with promises that promise preservation, and they would say what we need to do is identify the text which has been, that God has used and divinely preserved. So there's a couple different groups that would want to look towards a TR position that'd be like a TR priority position or something like a confessional text position. The reason why it's called a confessional text position, I think that may be a term that Dr. Jeff Riddle had proposed, is because their interpretation of their confessions would suggest that the reading something like the TR would be in accord with what their the writers of their confessions had in mind when they were talking about preservation. So, confessional text position and a TR priority position would be ones that would support this text. Now, from there, we can talk about the Robinson-Pierpont text and the Hodges and Farstad text. These texts, very similar to what we talked about with the Stephanus and Scrivener text, these texts are basically, in their main text, are basically identical. Dr. Robinson did not like the designation majority text, and he went with Byzantine text form. And the vast majority of time, these texts are absolutely identical. Where you're going to come into differences in these texts are particularly the book of Revelation and John 8. There's some differences there. Part of this has to do with the transmission of the book of Revelation, how that book was transmitted over time. And oftentimes you don't have these overwhelming majorities in some of the variant units in the book of Revelation. And also you have a similar problem in John chapter 8, where the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery. How they resolve those issues in these texts differ a little bit, and we don't need to go into necessarily all the details of that. But these two texts would represent people who want to take what's traditionally been called a majority text position. Now, often the majority text position is misunderstood because people think it's just a matter of counting manuscripts. Now, let's talk about that and explore that just a little bit, because there's definitely some misconceptions that are involved in that. With the Robinson-Pierpont text and the majority text, when you have strong agreement among your manuscripts, where your manuscript agreement comes to like 70 or 80%, that's what makes it into your main text. But sometimes people have this idea that, let's say there's 5,000 Greek manuscripts. Now, that number itself is a little bit misleading because some of the manuscripts we have are just fragments. But let's keep it simple. Let's say, just for the sake of discussion, let's say we had 5,000 Greek manuscripts, and they were complete copies from Genesis to Revelation of the Greek New Testament. Let's say that were our situation, just for the sake of discussion. Some people have the impression that if 2,501 manuscripts read this way, and 2,499 manuscripts read this way, that the majority would win and make it into the main text of these. That is not how it works. When the agreement of the manuscripts differ significantly, when you've got 30 or 40% of your manuscripts diverging, what this particular text, what Dr. Maurice Robinson did, was he applied a traditional, there's nuances to this, but just to simplify, he used kind of the basic tools of the textual critic to determine what the text was. So there's never a case where you have this very close, even split, and 50% of your manuscripts read this, or 49% of your manuscripts read this way, 51% of them read this way, so I'm going with the reading that reads 51%. You might get that idea from a title like this, the Greek New Testament according to the majority text. One of the other problems with trying to understand what the majority text is this assumption that all of our manuscripts have been collated, and they've been collated to such a high degree in accuracy. That is, all their readings are known, and all their readings are made in some catalog, whether digital or on paper somewhere, where you could even get it down to that level of precision. That just doesn't exist. And so both of these works had to rely heavily on an earlier work that was done by, I believe, von Soden. I don't have that work. I'd like to have it, where he collated a bunch of manuscripts, but the accuracy in that work has been called into question. One person said it's honeycombed with mistakes. So in dubious passages and passages where the reading is not very clear where the majority is, there's some room to be had discussion. Now, that's relatively infrequent. So let's move on to the last Greek New Testament I want to talk about here, and this is the Greek New Testament according to Family 35. And this is a distinct position of Dr. Wilbur Pickering, and he has been he's made quite a name in the field for people who are interested in the Byzantine text type. And his position is that there's a family of manuscripts that represent the autographs exactly. And this position is not, I don't think it's very widely held right now in the United States, but I do find that there's quite a few people. Dr. Pickering now lives in Brazil, and he has quite a few people who also believe in this, take this view, and that live in Brazil. So I noticed when I was doing this review of this Greek New Testament, there was very few Americans that had done anything at all on this text. But there were quite a few, or maybe a handful of reviews that have been done in Portuguese. So let me just say a few more things about Dr. Pickering, and then we'll move on and discuss some of the differences and also some of the agreements and things like that. So Dr. Pickering did a lot of research, and in fact, he was involved in the production of this Greek New Testament as well. In his research, he said, as he was examining different manuscripts, he came to the conclusion that Family 35, which he's dubbed these group of manuscripts, he was noticing strange coincidences and how they were agreeing with the majority in various places, and he would come up against textual problems, and he found the integrity of these manuscripts to be very, very strong. I'm way oversimplifying, but he's got a whole book on how he came to the conclusion that Family 35 was the text that represented the autographs. And he goes into the wide geographical distribution. And now I will say this is a position, as I mentioned before, I think it's widely held in Brazil. I don't know of any textual scholars that would side with Dr. Pickering on this, so it's definitely a minority view. But I will say that this text, and really either one of these texts, are virtually the same. There's very few differences. I don't know of any really major differences off the top of my head. There's definitely some minor variants, but as far as printed Greek New Testaments in a Byzantine line, this has the very best apparatus as far as I'm concerned. So moving forward, what can we say? What do we say about some of these things? The one thing, whatever position you take within in a Byzantine line, your Greek New Testament is going to have wide agreement. The differences between these Greek New Testaments, as I said, at the most, at the far end, which would probably be this text and possibly, or maybe even Family 35, you're still dealing with high percentage of agreement. I mean, this is not at all like the difference between this and, say, the Westcott and Hort text. The differences are mostly very, very minor. The agreements are very, very strong. And so anybody who would take any one of these positions, 98% of the time they're going to agree. Where they're going to disagree is if you take a majority text position, or something like the Robinson-Pierpont text as being the most accurate. There's going to be places in the TR, which I said earlier in the video, which tend to be more weakly supported by extant Greek witnesses, where you would say, you know, hey, I'm not going to support that particular reading. 1 John 5:7, there are 3 witnesses in heaven. That famous passage there would be one example. I think it's Acts chapter 8. I can't remember the verse right off the top of my head, where Philip is about to baptize the Ethiopian eunuch, and he says, if thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest, be baptized. I'm paraphrasing that a little bit, but that section of scriptures, not in the majority text, but in the TR. There's going to be, and honestly, those are probably a couple of the most major differences that are out there. So oftentimes when people kind of conflate these two things, they believe that people who hold to majority text position are automatically going to defend the Comma Johanneum, as it's called, and some of these other readings that aren't necessarily very strongly supported. And that's just kind of a misunderstanding between these two positions. Just want to add something real quick here, because I'm afraid I might have given I might be giving a wrong impression here, as to suggest that the majority text is always superior to the Textus Receptus readings. And my view, as I'm learning about this, I'm still formulating my own understanding of this, but I don't think that's always the case. There are some places where the Textus Receptus is strongly supported by Byzantine witnesses, and it will also be supported by very early witnesses from the Alexandrian line. And so that is why sometimes the TR will actually side with the critical text against the majority text. And so in those cases where the TR has both early support and a support from the Byzantine line, to me at least, I don't know everything yet, and I'm still learning a lot. To me at least, it seems very strongly appropriate to consider a TR reading over, say, a Robinson-Pierpont reading or a Byzantine text reading, where you have strong agreement among your Byzantine witnesses and also your early witnesses. And I also want to break in here and just say that you can be interested in the Byzantine text type and not have a strong conspiratorial view, or thinking that, just modern versions are evil or wicked or something like that. There's some people who have this very strong view, and I would say some people have taken a bombastic approach to this subject, but I don't think you necessarily have to have. There are advocates of the Byzantine line, there are advocates of the TR line who aren't angry, upset, or bombastic, although sometimes some of the people who have had the megaphone on this subject have had a very strong conspiratorial view. That is also not to suggest that there weren't ever occasions, there may have been occasions, that people who did not have a true view of the scriptures may have tried to change them, because we have record from so-called early church fathers who said, yes, that's exactly what happened, that heretics had tried to corrupt some of the scriptures. But like I said, you don't have to have a very strong conspiratorial view to be interested in this subject. If you're watching this and you've stayed this far with me, I doubt you're one of these people who are just really angry and want to attack people all the time. That's certainly not my approach. But I wanted to add those two thoughts. As I was editing this, I realized I didn't get those two thoughts out there, so I want to put those in right here. So apologize if this was distracting, but let's jump back into the video now. So there are also other positions that are out there which are not well, that haven't had time, I would say, to basically get a Greek New Testament printed, which reflects their views. So Pastor James Snap would be an example of someone who takes a what he calls equitable eclecticism. And that's not a view that's represented necessarily in any of these printed Greek New Testaments that I've shown you. He takes a conservative view and often finds times where he would agree with the Byzantine text. There are men through history, I would say F.H.A. Scrivener, Harry Sturtz, who have taken a view that is favorable towards the Byzantine text, but they haven't themselves produced a full Greek New Testament for us to see. Pastor Snap has produced Pastor James Snap has produced an edition of Mark that's available on his website, and he discussed different variants. But there's people who would say, maybe they don't take a Byzantine priority approach, but would say that New Testament criticism in general needs to consider the Byzantine text a lot more, because it also is a very ancient text like the Alexandrian text and should have an equal place at the table. What happens often in reasoned eclecticism is that the Alexandrian manuscripts dominate the conversation. It's rare that a Byzantine reading would actually, a unique Byzantine reading, something that's unique to the Byzantine text type, would actually be accepted as the as a correct reading in something like the Nestle-Aland text. So I think these are kind of the basic positions. You've got TR positions. That would be, you've got people like Pastor Doug Wilson, who would say, let's start with a text like the Stephanus' text. Let's make that our starting point for the discussion, and he would lean towards supporting a TR reading, but he's not necessarily going to support every single reading to the point that he's going to absolutely say that it's 100% perfect. There's people who will take a confessional text position, and they would take a providential view that God has miraculously preserved the Textus Receptus as it's come down to us through the Scrivener. There are people who would take a Byzantine text form position or a majority text position. And then there's also people who would support a particular group of manuscripts within the larger Byzantine line, which would be the family 35, which has been put forward by Wilbur Pickering. Well, you made it to the end of the video. I really appreciate you watching. I hope this discussion was helpful. I've left a link for Pastor Truelove's video as well in the description. I'm sure he said some things a lot better than I could have. And so just want to tell you how much I appreciate you watching. I hope this video was useful to you in some way.